to not talk about Caitlin Clark with all of this. Like, they had a commercial.
Nike made a huge misstep with Caitlin Clark recently, and it's been impossible to ignore. In their latest campaign, Nike managed to mention almost every other top athlete in women's basketball, including Juju Watkins and Sabrina Ionescu, but somehow left Caitlin Clark out of the spotlight. If that wasn't enough, when they finally did include her, they made it feel like an afterthought, throwing her into the ad for a mere 10 seconds, as if she were a cameo character in a family reunion video rather than one of the biggest stars in the game today. Let's break this down. Nike launched a new commercial, and they cleverly hyped up A'ja Wilson, one of the WONBAS's most prominent players. Wilson's name and face got prime screen time, while Caitlin Clark, who arguably has a much larger influence on the sport, was relegated to the background. To add insult to injury, Nike didn't even include Clark in the main ad. Instead, they quietly edited her in post-production, using a voiceover that awkwardly said "Rookie of the Year, Caitlin Clark," while showing a brief clip of her. The tone of the ad was all wrong. It wasn't even her speaking. It felt forced and fake, a quick patch-up to address an obvious oversight. As if they thought we wouldn't notice, but fans, of course, saw right through it. Nike really thought they could sneak Caitlin Clark in there without anyone catching on, but the receipts were clear. Fans immediately called them out. Instead of taking responsibility for the blunder, Nike tried to gaslight everyone into believing it was always part of the plan. Social media exploded with frustration, pointing out that Caitlin Clark's role in the campaign had been minimized when she was, in fact, the one player who deserved more than a cameo. Let's be real. Caitlin Clark isn't just another good player, she's arguably the most marketable player in women's sports right now. Her impact on the WNBA and women's basketball in general is undeniable. She has turned heads and made waves in a way that few athletes have. Her college games at Iowa were pulling in millions of viewers, at times even surpassing NBA games in viewership. This isn't just a player who's having a moment, as she's shifting the entire landscape. When she declared for the WNBA draft, ticket prices for Indiana Fever games skyrocketed by 400%. The WNBA had to revise its entire TV schedule just to make sure her games were showcased properly. She's not just a player, she's the reason more and more eyes are on the WNBA. And what did Nike do with all of that potential? They gave her 10 seconds in an ad like she was some random rookie just happy to be there. This isn't just a missed opportunity, it's a serious miscalculation. Caitlin Clark has turned into a cultural phenomenon. Her jersey sales are breaking records, and she's attracting a new audience to the WNBA that was previously hard to reach. People who had never cared about women's basketball are now tuning into her games. She is the reason the WNBA is getting more mainstream attention than ever before. Yet Nike, one of the biggest and most influential sports brands in the world, has barely capitalized on her stardom. They should be building an entire campaign around Caitlin Clark, celebrating her as the face of women's sports, yet instead they seem to have treated her like an afterthought. And that's what's so mind-boggling. Nike is not exactly short on resources. They have the power to shape trends in sports culture. But in this case, they have failed miserably. Instead of focusing on what is clearly working, Caitlin Clark, they've chosen to spotlight other players, including A'ja Wilson, who is certainly talented but doesn't have the same kind of cultural impact that Caitlin Clark brings. No disrespect to A'ja, but when it comes to viewership, ticket sales, and bringing new fans into the fold, Caitlin Clark is the one who is moving the needle for the WNBA. Nike should have been pushing her front and center, but instead, they've chosen to ignore her and hope no one notices. This isn't just a minor marketing oversight, it's a massive missed opportunity. Caitlin Clark isn't just any player in the WNBA. She is the most recognizable, influential, and marketable figure the sport has seen in years. From a business perspective, it doesn't make sense to bury her in the background. If Nike wants to see success in the women's sports market, they need to invest in the athletes who are making the biggest impact. And right now, that's Caitlin Clark. Her popularity isn't just growing, it's explosive. She's breaking records, selling out arenas, and drawing the attention of casual fans, including some of the biggest NBA stars. This isn't just hype, it's the reality of where the sport is headed. Yet Nike has failed to seize the moment. They've built an entire ad around A'ja Wilson, who is certainly deserving of recognition but doesn't hold the same cultural influence. Caitlin Clark is the one changing the game. She's drawing crowds, generating buzz, and pushing women's basketball into new territory. Why wouldn't Nike build their campaign around her? Why is she being treated like an afterthought in the very campaign that should be showcasing her dominance? Nike's misstep is even more glaring when we look at the broader picture. Caitlin Clark is not just another player in the WNBA, she is changing the face of women's basketball. The numbers don't lie. Her jersey sales have been the highest in the league, surpassing those of even other top-tier players like A'ja Wilson. She has become a household name, and her influence is only growing. Yet Nike, despite having her on their roster, continues to treat her like a secondary figure. What's more shocking is that Nike seems to be ignoring the very thing that could drive their success in the women's sports market: authenticity. Fans know when brands are being disingenuous, and in this case, it's painfully obvious that Nike is trying to force a narrative rather than follow reality. Caitlin Clark isn't just a good player, she is the face of a movement. She is the reason so many people are finally paying attention to women's sports in a way they never have before. To ignore her is to ignore the future of women's basketball. Caitlin Clark's marketing potential is undeniable, yet Nike has dropped the ball by failing to capitalize on it. They should have been rolling out signature shoes, giving her her own campaign, and putting her face on billboards everywhere. Instead, they opted for a short, half-hearted inclusion in an ad that barely acknowledges her role in the sport. Fans were quick to notice, and the backlash has been swift and intense. This isn't just about a shoe deal or a commercial, it's about a shift in the culture of sports. Caitlin Clark represents that shift. She is the reason the WNBA is finally getting the attention it deserves, and Nike should have recognized that. Instead, they've opted for a half-hearted approach that ignores the obvious. Nike had a chance to build an empire around Caitlin Clark, but they chose to downplay her influence in favor of a narrative that just doesn't fit. The lesson here is simple: brands can't fake authenticity. Fans can tell when a company is not being genuine, and Nike's recent decisions regarding Caitlin Clark have proven that. If they want to succeed in the women's sports market, they need to stop playing catch-up and start building campaigns around the athletes who are actually changing the game. Caitlin Clark is one of those athletes, and Nike would do well to recognize that. If Nike continues down this path of ignoring Caitlin Clark and treating her like an afterthought, they're going to regret it. Another brand will come along and capitalize on her stardom, leaving Nike in the dust. Just like Adidas did when they fumbled their relationship with Steph Curry, Nike is risking losing a generational talent by failing to recognize her influence. They have a chance to fix it, but only if they act quickly. Caitlin Clark is not going anywhere, and if Nike doesn't step up, they may find themselves watching as another brand takes over the market they could have had.